make this happen, and I could barely keep track of all the clicking. I thought it was like press one button. Okay, cool. So this is me. I'm going to give you an overview of some of the things that are in the future of DREAM and that we've been thinking about as a directors group. I have a bunch of disclosures, none relevant to this. So we're going to talk about three basic buckets. The first is a very large NIH consortium called Bridge to AI, which had just been announced last year before the Las Vegas meeting, but we didn't really know what it was going to be about and what we were going to be doing from a DREAM perspective, and so we have much more certainty this year. We'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about a second NIH consortium called the Early Disease Research Network, and then we'll talk sort of big picture about the community and what we're hoping to accomplish, and really maybe some of the things that were ideas that came out of last year's meeting that we hope we will be able to pursue in more detail. So Bridge to AI is intended to be NIH's signature AI consortium. It, quote, will set the stage for widespread AI in biomedicine. The idea is not that it does every practical AI question in biomedicine. And like, let's start off with who knows what AI actually means, right? That part of it is already complex, but it's meant to create data sets and templates for how AI-driven problem solving can happen. Therefore, it's got an interesting structure, a structure that itself is a bit experimental. This is the way the initial project was structured. A bridge center, which has activities like an administrative core, an ethics core, a tool optimization core, a standards core, a training or skills and workforce core, and 4 projects that are kind of exemplars for how you generate really AI-ready data. Those exemplars, well, why 4? Could be 2, could be 6, could be 8. So the idea is to create a structure that is stable, flexible, and then itself could be reused, extended, and expanded on. You can immediately see why this is an experiment. Should ethics be in the center? Or should ethics be deeply integrated into each project? Or should it be both? What's the correct ratio of that? That's something that the consortium itself, and you could make the same comment about tools, standards, and anything. The consortium itself is trying to figure out, trying to come up with a proposal for, here's the right way to consider centralization versus distribution of different activities. Okay, so that's the structure, but where are these things actually located? Well, the administrative and ethics cores were initially awarded to UCSD. The investigator then moved to Yale, so they're now based out of Yale. Teaming and standards were awarded to Colorado, and tool optimization and skills and workforce here at UCLA. And, oh, cool. And the 4 data generating projects cover a huge range of different activities. The first is out of University of South Florida, and it's really focused on voice. If you think about the cough project that the TB project using cough as the input data from this morning, it's really extending on that. The idea is that voice is an incredible descriptor of all sorts of things, and one that we intrinsically use every day. When you hear somebody's voice, you immediately infer a lot of things about their age, ancestry, sleep status, health and well-being, gender. I mean, there's a whole series of things. Not only that, but when you get to hear somebody talk a lot like I am, you immediately infer a lot of things about my level of education, fluency, how confident I am in what I'm talking about, whether I'm making stuff up on the fly. You get a lot of information from it. How can we create a data set for acoustic information to understand that aspect of disease and directly link it to EMR data? And so the idea is to create a large data set of voices linked to genetics and clinical and epidemiologic information and be able to start making predictions about it. Second project out of UCSD is entirely different. Can we come up with cell maps, basically mapping the architecture of cells, the protein complex of cells, where they are, what proteins come together, and their 3D spatial changes across health and disease with a focus in a couple of different disease types. So very molecular, entirely done in model systems. So project 1 was about voice. Project 2 is about cell lines and cell cultures and how proteins come together. Very different AI-based challenges. Project 3 is about the concept of salutogenesis, which basically means the return to health. If somebody gets ill, how do they have a recovery or a stabilization from that? The project is using diabetes, type 2 diabetes as a model system and running a really complicated stratified population design where it takes healthy and well people from very tightly controlled sex and ancestry groups to make sure it's diverse. This is run out of UW in Seattle, and it's collecting a lot of complicated data, including retinal scans, EMR data, and potentially some genetics, and trying to make predictions about onset, severity, and changes in disease course. So project 1, voice, project 2, cell lines and cell culture, project 3, retinal scans and other types of imaging data. Project 4 is entirely different. What's the hardest part of medical care in terms of the complexity of the care? You could argue the ICU, where there are tons of changes, tons of equipment, quick turnarounds on imaging, a huge variety of blood tests. And so the last one is to take distributed generation of ICU data. I'm going to forget the right number, but it's like 15 ICU sites around the US are contributing data into a central repository, including all the kind of longitudinal scan data that you might imagine, breath sensors or heart rate or other types of information, blood pressure, that are being longitudinally collected in an ICU setting. And the imaging, clinical, and other data can be used for both diagnostic purposes linked to the EMR and risk prediction. Who is most at risk of having a crash in the next 30 minutes? How should the stratification and triage of patients in the ICU be done? That is an incredible diversity of projects. That's why the NIH picked them that way, to really challenge it. Within that context, then, the tool optimization core, which is co-led by myself, Jake, and Kyle Elrod at OHSU, is intended to serve as a hub for tools, benchmarking, standards, and optimization of methods across those. And you can immediately see the fun, lots of data that's going to be emerging over the next 3 years, and the challenges, no common data types between the things that we looked at. And so the things that are happening there include supporting tool generation, coordinating tool development with other consortia, and of course, benchmarking. And so that leads us to DREAM challenges. And so the plan is to be launching challenges annually over the next 4 years. The topics are going to be a mix of specific and more general. So these are the ones that are the DGPs as a whole. And the first place that this is going to come together is spring 2024, where there is a data jamboree being planned. Basically, we hope all 4 of the DGPs will have their first initial data sets available. We will have a meeting where there is a pre-availability of data, some specific problems chosen for each, opportunities for people within and beyond the consortium to try to look at the data. Some of this will be the first opportunities to really dig into the data, so there may be quality control issues or annotation problems or things like that. And you can also probably recognize differences in IRB, consenting, ethics, data privacy considerations across those. Something like voice is very complicated, has a lot of intimate information, but is it the same type of intimate information as a retinal scan, which is used as an identifier? And that's very different than a picture of a cell and the protein complexes within it. So that's in planning now. April will be the launch of it, and we anticipate multiple challenge-like activities. We don't exactly know what they're going to be yet at that point in time. The other thing that's in planning and long gestating is setting some standards for data visualization for the consortium as a whole, and we anticipate that this will be linked to the Data Jamboree. The idea is to have things like standard colors and features that maximize visual interpretability, and that's something actually that Sage has been working on, a really nice front-end web platform to automate and optimize voting on what's the best way to consider visualization of different data sets. The other big consortia that was renewed last year and provides a large chunk of data is the NCI's Early Detection Research Network, which is a collaboration of groups focused on early detection biomarkers for different types of cancer. And as part of the renewal, there's a plan to have a singular DREAM challenge launched in early detection biomarkers annually over the next 4 years. This was also just announced and awarded, I think, the day before the Las Vegas meeting. And so the first year is now over. And so it's a 5-year program. The first year didn't have any challenges. The last 4 did. And so the first year is over. And so we'll be launching the first challenge this year. It is not quite locked down, but almost certainly going to be on hyperparameterization optimization. So effectively, when you've got a method, how do you figure out the optimal way to pick the parameters for that method across different data types, be they clinical, imaging, or molecular data? Okay, so I talked to you for about 10 minutes about a couple of big consortia. What about DREAM as an organization? Well, last year we asked this question at this meeting, and I stood up here and I said, what are the really important things? And there were lots of questions, and then afterwards a lot of emails. And the ideas that were raised were we need to have different types of challenges, different challenge ideas, potentially an enhanced social media presence. Think about expanding the directorship, better leveraging virtual activities, challenge registry, and oh yeah, so we have been working on expanding the directorship. We had a call for that went out in May. We've interviewed a number of candidates, and I think next week we will be finalizing and inviting a number of new DREAM directors forward. You also saw the challenge registry and the opportunities there. And of course, new challenge ideas is something that is, there we go, is ongoing. We've got some that are going to emerge from these large consortia, as well as a few others that I'll quickly introduce that are coming up. But this is also a call to action. There were ideas presented last year for things we should look at. We've moved about half of them forward, and we really benefit from other suggestions for what the community needs, what will drive engagement, what will make it more impactful. So I'll close out with 3 examples of challenges that are emerging for next year that I haven't talked about yet. So the first is called the PEGS Challenge. This is run through or focuses on an NIEHS, National Institute of Environmental and Health Sciences Studies, cohort, which basically links demographics, so age, sex, ancestry, location, other features, genetics, and environmental risk data, things like exposures or other features that might be collected. It's just under a 10K patient cohort, and the question at hand is basically saying, if you know genetic and environmental features, can you predict individual features? Targeted for a launch spring next year. Second are the second and third iterations of the long-running olfaction challenges. It's funny, the first olfaction challenge happened when I was not yet engaged with DREAM, and my team was participating in it way back at that point. And it tackles like a truly fascinating question. Why do we smell things the way we do? How does molecular structure influence the way we perceive odors? And what's that linkage between our perception and like chemical structures and features? And although there's ability to do predictions, nobody really understands that question. And the challenges will be 2 different data sets, one next year, one the year after, taking a mixture of chemical structures, that have been scored by experts about features of their olfaction, and then trying to make predictions. Can you make that linkage? And then the last one is another follow-up challenge on rare diseases through the RareX Consortium, which is a community of rare disease focused. The version 1 challenge will be presented today, this afternoon, and focused on pediatric neurodevelopment. And this challenge will focus on predicting patient outcomes from surveys, genetics, and other information. And it's about next summer for a launch. So ultimately, that gives you a sense of where we are. We're really open to feedback, suggestions, ideas, and very responsive to them. And of course, I do like none of this. The other DREAM directors are listed here. And as Pablo said at the beginning, it's really the community that drives all of this forward, including even our funders and peer reviewers and editors and other friends who are essential to making all of this actually happen. So that's it. That's the last thing between you and lunch. Happy for questions, and thank you.
Questions for Paul?
Paul, what's the best way for people to get in touch with DREAM to propose a new challenge idea?
That's a great question, Jake. So yeah, it's funny. There's the newsletters that we send out, and often in those newsletters we say, oh, if you have an interesting challenge idea, please let us know. And it's fascinating how many good ideas come out of that. Sometimes they don't fly because there are challenges with the data set. Pun not intended. There are difficulties with the data set. And a great example of that is there was a connection that came through the newsletter, and I'll answer Jake's question better in a second, but a connection that came to an in vitro fertilization clinic that had massive amounts of IVF data. And it just turned out to not really be accessible from the context of a challenge for reasons you can imagine. Where do you find that? Well, dreamchallenges.org is the DREAM website. And on it, there's a link to contact us, a monitored account, and you can get information on everything. That's the best way. The second best way, which will also work, is just email any of us. Any one of the directors will gladly talk to you, work it out. And, you know, we each have our own areas of focus. I may pay more attention to cancer challenges. And if you came up to us with a challenge that was focused on something else, we'll get you to the right director who thinks about those problems. Thanks, Jake.
So my question is about prior data outside of the challenge. So when we ran the network reconstruction challenge, the teams that did best on that challenge almost always used prior knowledge about cellular networks, right? Like just incorporating prior knowledge in some other external data source wildly improved predictions from actual data. And in the bridge to AI, some groups will have access to their own EMR data, but not all. Some groups will have phenomenal voice data, but probably most will have none. And how do you seed prior data into these challenges? So not that there should necessarily be a flat playing field, but like, I am sure Amazon would smoke everyone else, you know, at a voice challenge, just because the amount I talk to my Alexa is nearly endless. And I'm curious as to how you work to get prior data sets out there that will at least give opportunity to people who don't have data.
Yeah, so Paul raises a really interesting and important question. I think you can conceptually divide this into two things. Sometimes what you're trying to do is optimize the algorithm. You're trying to compare 50 different techniques, in which case, yeah, people who've run the algorithm on more data sets might have more knowledge, but what you're really trying to do is figure out in a data set independent way which algorithm works best. In this case, we're less worried about it. Sometimes you're trying to create a clinically useful tool, or you're going to try to solve a specific biological problem. When that's the case, there's a couple of things. One, some of our challenges have previously made it difficult or impossible for people to do that. That's not to bring in external data. That's not something that happens much anymore. It's allowed, but not required. Second, we try to point people at the specific data sets that are public and available. We try to make those data sets as curated and friendly and easy to incorporate with the frameworks. And then we monitor what types of data really mattered and which ones don't. And it's got challenge to challenge variability. And I'll give an example that you'll recognize well. Actually, the amount of prior data people brought into tumor evolution studies didn't really impact the results much. You could think about reasons why it is, and I'm sure you'll tell us in your keynote, but yeah, it is probably also problem set variable. So partial answer, but gives you a couple things to think about.
I guess just commenting on that, the other thing is, availability of resources for developing your models, which is so important, which is, AWS will also crush you. So we try in certain challenges to have at least a platform, that's available for all students. For example, the Million Promoter Prediction Challenge, we got sponsored for using cloud from Google, and that was a big part of why the challenge was important. So we definitely try to think of ways to make this just for everybody, not just for who has the most resources.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. But we also do limit groups on how much compute they are, because to some extent they use because we're trying to benchmark algorithms rather than necessarily solve the problem. And could you gain an extra 0.03% by throwing 200 million extra trees in a random forest? Maybe in some cases, but it's not necessarily the goal of the challenges that we're running. Not necessarily. Sometimes it is. Yeah.
I have a more futuristic question about DREAM's plans of moving to a space where you're actually bridging the disconnect between bioinformaticians and clinicians. So as we're moving closer and closer towards the future of healthcare, the future of research is going to be a lot more precise methods. Have you thought about either incorporating sub-challenges within these challenges or future directions where how do you address people who have spent years just training in patient-facing care and the really big daunting task of trying to understand what's coming out of these sorts of challenges?
Great question. So I started off with Bridge to AI, and I didn't mention the skills and workforce, but you've basically articulated one of the whole aims of that is to figure out how do we do that training at different levels. So you could say, how do we do it for citizen scientists, for patients? How do we do it for clinicians who've been practicing for 30 years, for those who are in training, for students in high school, that sort of thing? And the answer is different to each of those problems. DREAM itself has put less effort into thinking about the dissemination of the outputs as it has into maximizing the size of the community and the people who are participating in solving those problems. And I think the conceptual reason is that we're focused on how do you come up with an evaluation, and then the step of communicating that you have to have a result first before you can. And as you've seen, sometimes we don't get results that are anywhere close to clinically useful. And so future looking, I think there's going to be a natural progression that way as we get results that are bigger data sets and closer to clinical utility. But I think there'll always be a bit of a gap there. So it's not a great answer, but gives you a sense that we're thinking about it.
All right, so I was hoping you could expand a bit more on the tool optimization core. Are you guys just planning on benchmarking existing algorithms, or is there also space to work with people to help make their tools better? And a bit of motivation why I'm asking this is commonly, the biologist is not the best software engineer and may have this great new algorithm, but it doesn't run very fast. And so is there space for that as well?
There is, and I'm going back on slides. Yeah, so that fourth part of it is exactly that, is to figure out where there are gaps. You've outlined a general problem that bioinformatics software is terrible, which is well known. A couple of things there. Jake, myself, and 50 other people wrote a perspective on how to evaluate software, bioinformatics software, its utility, characteristics like that, that's out for peer review now. And it gives a sense for what we hope is going to be a standard in how to do that. That doesn't fix software engineering practices, it just gives you a way to evaluate them. Second, a key activity within the consortium is to identify those tools that are particularly sensitive or at risk, where either it's used by a lot of different projects or it has a very poor maintenance base, or both, right? Effectively, you're trying to find the tool that everybody uses but has one person working on it at home, it's not well documented, that kind of thing, and then bring software engineering expertise to solve it. That hasn't happened yet. One reason is that the DGPs are still finalizing what exactly they're doing and what their first data sets are going to be. But I don't think it's going to be the case that we have anywhere close to sufficient resources to do all of this. And I'd also mention the Chan Zuckerberg open source software initiative, which is, I think, now in its 6th or 7th iteration, which has supported a lot of projects and really moved forward software engineering practices in bioinformatics. And so I would also point tool developers that way, even though that's not a satisfying answer.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
My question is related to what happens behind the scene from the time that you get an email with an idea to approve it. So what factors make an idea very interesting to you? And also, what is the process really? So when someone approaches you, should they come with a proposal in hand, like a one-page proposal, and then extend it to like what are the data sets, what are the potential algorithms?
That's such a great question, and we'll put together a slide on this for next year's stuff, because I think that, yeah, should have done that. So here's how it goes. Imagine somebody contacts any director through any way with an idea. They'll read their email, and eventually, after a day or two, will respond back and say, tell us a little bit about this. Give us a couple of bullet points so we can make sure that the right people are there, and then we'll have a Zoom call and go through. Okay, good to meet you. Do you understand how challenges work, and do we know what you're kind of working on? Is there a fit there? And I'll give examples of things that would be difficult. If people didn't have data available, then it's tough to run a challenge without data. Similarly, we start to talk about things like who owns the data? What are the characteristics? Is this a solved problem? Is this a problem where it's a really good problem, but nobody has even tried yet? Therefore, we don't have any techniques to compare or try on it. And at that point in time, there's a bit of back and forth, designing what a potential challenge would look like. And then a proposal is put together in the form of 5 to 15 slides. The full set of directors will take a look at the proposal, we'll hear it, ask some questions, making sure that there are no problems with the design, like, wait, how are you going to score this? Or is there a possibility for overfitting or for data leakage or things like that? And then at that point in time, the challenge gets initiated. I mentioned nothing in there about funding, but it does cost money to do these things. And sometimes part of the process is people come in with the resources, or they have their own time that they're going to be able to put in through their own grants and people in their groups. And then sometimes we explicitly go out and seek funding for it. Pablo mentioned the promoter challenge, random promoter challenge, where there wasn't funding up front for the compute, but there was for the data generation. And Pablo went out and said, how do we go and find compute money, and got a corporate sponsor for that. So there's a mix of things that'll happen, but it all starts with kind of an email and then a Zoom call to kind of check that there's going to be a fit, and then an iterative process, an evaluation and approval from the full directors group, and then actually running it.
Thank you.
So yeah, basically it could cost from zero if, a lab does all the work, although we would also like, the people who come to the conference. I think this is an important part of DREAM, to all the way to, if you want to delegate everything, for example, to Sage, which has happened, taking all the analysis and all the computation, then that's, could be all the way to 40K or something like that. That's kind of the range, depending on.
And of course, assuming that data exists. In some of the challenges where data was created as part of the challenges, you can just guess how much the data cost. And yeah, so high variability in size and scope.